Hello again and welcome to the Dr Hilary Show. Coming up, one of the UK's most recognisable family lawyers, known for her straight-talking, no-nonsense advice. She founded Lloyd Platt and Company back in 1992 and since then has represented everyone from MPs and judges to TV stars and pop icons. She's a regular on TV and radio, explaining complicated legal issues with clarity and good humour. I'll be joined by Vanessa Lloyd Platt. First today, a reminder that the best health and wellness advice I can give you is to click our subscribe button on YouTube. Nothing is more important than your health. So make it a priority today, right now. Click subscribe, and in return, I'll make sure you receive health tips that you can trust and rely on every week. Now, it's said that divorce is one of the most stressful life events. This week, I'm joined by a top UK divorce lawyer, media commentator, and the founder of Lloyd Platt and Company. Known for representing high-profile clients and making family law clear for everyone. She's a familiar face on TV, radio, and in the press. Vanessa Lloyd Platt joins me now. Vanessa, welcome. You're very lovely to see you.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm really fine. A bit hay fevery, and I think a lot of people are suffering this season all over the place. And if I've got my sprays and everything, absolutely
okay.
fine. But it's very difficult. Sometimes if you're in court, your eyes are running and you're trying to look strong and you are looking like a complete moron, blowing your nose every few seconds. And the judge is going, "What did you say?" Right, but anyway.
Well, the trees are all in bloom now, all in leaf, aren't they? So tree pollen right now is an issue for many people. It'll be grass pollen a bit later, and then moulds at the end of the season. That's a bit miserable information, isn't it? But so no, you're looking very well.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about divorce and particularly the health implications of this. I mean, I think it's true about 40% of marriages end in divorce.
It's probably getting nearer to 50% now. Very sadly. We had a big burst of what we call the silver splitters. They are the people that really from 40 to 80 that are suddenly getting divorced when the children leave home. And it's really been problematic because people who have relied on their partner in the past are suddenly finding themselves on their own. They've never dealt with a bank account. They've never dealt with anything. And suddenly they're literally on their own. And there are huge problems as well in that group. They've got the finances, but they're very frightened. Yeah.
Well, there are so many implications health-wise. I mean, I know that you're very good at looking after people's emotional welfare as looking at the law and what they're entitled to and that process. And that's so important because divorce is very stressful. It is considered one of life's most stressful events. So it can leave people feeling socially isolated, lonely, bewildered, lacking in confidence. There's also to deal with, the bitterness, the anger, the hatred sometimes, not always, of course, but all of those things. And then people can resort to coping mechanisms which might not be very good for their health, such as drinking too much or using substances. So many issues. And I know that you've been very interested in how divorce impinges on people's psychological and physical health.
Very much so. I started to do my own research on this because I was very interested that some people seem to have mental health issues and going that way, and other people seem to develop more physical symptoms. And I wanted to understand why those two things were as they were. So the research I did, and I looked at it in all the journals and studies all around the world, and what I discovered was that where people go in to a divorce scenario and remain in with very unrealistic expectations, they become physically ill. Where they are a bit disappointed, a bit angry, but they sort of get over it, sometimes they have temporary mental health issues that they're very sad, very miserable, may have to go on things to begin with to help them to get through it. and some therapy, but they get through it. But if you insist that your partner, maybe you've been abused and you want to punish that person and you can't seem to punish them through the court system, you will get physically ill. And the research bears it out.
That's very interesting. And obviously we'll talk about how people can avoid those pitfalls in a moment. But do people realise that divorce is not just about separating and splitting physically as a couple in a relationship? Do they get advice from most legal outlets, if you like? Be realistic. This is what you can expect. This is how you might feel. You might not be sleeping very well. Do this, do that. Do people get that sort of advice as well, generally?
From the good lawyers, yes. But from the ones that aren't so good, that think it's their fight as well, they really can cause damage to their clients as well. A good fight might feel good for you and you might get a lot of fees in from your client, but you have to think of what are you trying to achieve? What's your end game, your client's end game, and how do you achieve it in the best way? And one of the things that I like to do is to get the information as soon as possible, the financial information in particular, and get some advice together with a barrister sometimes, if it's appropriate in the case, and say to them, this is more likely to happen than anything else. We need them to understand exactly where their case is going to end up so that they go into it with their eyes wide open. And all this nasty letter writing between lawyers, sometimes you have to put certain things on record, but it's a complete waste of time because most of the time, the court never even read it. It just fires up costs, fires up people's emotions, and then they can't cope. So really, we say to people, look, mediation now is very, very important, and it's almost become obligatory in the eyes of the courts. They're, when we go to court now, they're saying, well, have you considered mediation? Have you booked for mediation? If you haven't, they'll penalise you.
Okay.
So it's really changed. My firm do mediation because we found it was an important tool that you can compromise things, even in the most acrimonious cases, if the parties are willing enough to sit down and have an independent person say, look, if you went to court, this is going to happen. If you keep arguing, not only are you going to waste all the money, you're going to affect your children very badly. You are going to cause yourself to be unsettled. And the longer this goes on, the longer you can't start your new life.
So an essential prop on your desk is a big box of tissues for all concerned.
Oh, we get through thousands of them. But sometimes when clients really, the well opens and off they go, I will say, you're charged extra for tissues. It stops them instantly. They're not, of course, charged for them. But, we are not there as therapists. Yeah. But we have to understand all the nuances and how they're affected and what's really bothering them.
Yes.
And one of the most important things, if a good lawyer looks at a situation, is what they tell you as they're just about to go out the door. And they say, does it matter if I'm seeing someone else? Or does it matter if my children don't want to live with me? The big ones come at that moment. You have to say, come back in, please.
Yes.
Let's talk about this. What are you really worried about?
Yes. Isn't it interesting that people often leave that big question to the end of a consultation? Happens with doctors as well. Let's talk about the psychological issues first. I mean, stress, of course, it's very stressful, and that can induce both anxiety and depression.
Yes.
You must see this a lot.
We do. And when we get worried about a client because it goes from being a bit stressed to developing a mental health problem, we will be honest with them and say, look, I do think that you really do need to see someone. I think it will assist your case if you do, and you'll be able to understand everything a lot better. We have to be very gentle because if you're going through a crisis, the last thing you need is your lawyer to say, you're nuts. I mean, that's not what we're saying. We're saying you have gone past a certain point you can't even take in the process. So it's very important. We work with a lot of psychologists and therapists. And if we think our clients are heading there, we will give them names of different people that they can go to straight away. Because a client who can't take in the stress, can't understand what they're being told, is even more vulnerable. And we have to have them in a state of mind where they can cope. And so some lawyers don't care, and this is the problem, and they will shoot off letters and not realize that their client is finding it so hard to manage that they crash out. We don't want that.
And you're probably seeing people who aren't sleeping very well. They look very tired. Their weight might be fluctuating one way or the other. Either they're not eating or they're overeating.
That is a real problem.
Is it?
That we call it the divorce diet. But there are so many people who stop eating. One reason they think it will make them look better so that perhaps they can meet someone else, or they just don't have time to because they're so busy worrying about everything. And one of the things, if we get a combination of no sleep and not eating, those are the ones that are going to crash out. So we say, have you eaten today? And what we quite often do, we bring food in so that while we're with them, they can actually eat something, and you'd be surprised how much they perk up, right? And one of the things that mediators do now, the very same thing. They always have food around so that they can make sure that they are being fed, because when they're being fed, they can think straight. And it's so people just don't realise the impact of all of this. Yeah. We do. We've been doing it for such a long time. And it's a holistic way of dealing with things. If you've got a client who feels secure, that feels that they're cared about, they'll listen, and they're more likely to settle their cases.
And that's really important, isn't it? Because very often someone going through a divorce will lose friends. Friends can become enemies. They'll take sides.
Yes.
And suddenly that person can feel very lonely and abandoned.
Yes.
Not just by the spouse, but by everybody else.
Well, we hear this a lot, but one of the clues to this is if you don't start running down your partner to everyone in sight, that is less likely to happen, and that you're more likely to keep mutual friends who will think, well, this isn't a hassle, I don't have to feel nervous about it. But there's some people have this tendency to share everything with the world. It doesn't help your children. It doesn't help you. And basically zipping is like, please don't do that. And you wonder why you lose all the friends. That is why. People they're not interested. Some people are curious to begin with. Oh, so your husband had an affair. But the rest of it, they're not interested in. And that is why people shy away. Some clients say, people that they've known walk over the other side of the road so they can avoid speaking to them. It can make them feel very, very isolated. But just not talking so much about your partner, it's good for you, because get over it, move on.
Now, I know that you've got a lot more insight into this than I have, but I was looking at some research on the physical consequences of divorce. And as I understand it, the risks of cardiovascular disease are increased. Immune function is affected because of all the cortisol level, the stress hormone levels, even diabetes. So there are identifiable physical consequences as well as the psychological.
Absolutely. And when we fill in the financial forms, they're called a Form E, you have to put down about your health, because that issue could affect the settlement. Okay. And I would say now, in the last 5 years, virtually every single client is putting down type 2 diabetes, is putting down heart murmurs, or these sort of physical difficulty. We saw them before, but not in such huge numbers. I think people are generally feeling more depressed because of life generally. We keep hearing, Third World War is coming and all of this stuff. It is impacting on people's psyche. So you add to that the worries of the divorce and where are the children going to live, where are they going to live. It really has had its impact. And we do say to people, if you watch what you're eating, but eat sensibly, you can get through this. You don't have to become a type 2 diabetic if you look after yourself. And looking after yourself is so important when you go through a divorce. I can't emphasize it more.
Mm. And I know that I think the divorce rate has declined in recent years. So modern marriages are tending to be more stable a little bit. I don't know if that's true or not. But if there are financial constraints, the economy is not great at the moment,
yes,
and people are worried about the finances and they're staying together because they can't afford to divorce.
Yes.
That's stressful in itself. Living under the same roof with somebody you don't want to be with.
Well, we have seen
stressful
cases where people have actually got divorced and they're still living together because they can't afford to actually live separately. So that causes enormous stress. But you can always get through any situation if you're both determined to make it work. There are these huge stresses, but people are getting through them if they know that the cases can be dealt with quickly. The problem with the divorce system at the moment in this country is it is very cumbersome. There aren't enough judges and courts. So people are waiting around for their cases to be dealt with. And that wait is causing more problems and more stress. And where you've calmed your clients down and they're in a position to negotiate, it can take 6 months to get the hearing date. And that is why, as lawyers all over the place, we are coming up with alternative dispute resolutions. So we're having meetings with the other side's barristers or solicitors and saying, let's try and sort this out. And if you can do that, it really helps. We're mediating more. And there's something called hybrid mediation where you can bring your lawyer on with you so that you can try and sort things out if you're frightened of being on your own with a mediator.
Well, that sounds like a big step forward.
It's a huge step forward.
Now, do you notice any difference in the way men and women cope with divorce?
Yes, totally. Women, it depends on their age group and if they've got young children or not. Those with young children can struggle because they don't know how to deal with the situation or move forward, unless, of course, they've already met someone. The silver splitters, the older group, sometimes they fly because they think, yay, I've got rid of him. This is the women I'm talking about. I finally got rid of him. I don't have to wash his socks. I don't have to listen to his moaning. I don't have to look after him. Yippee doodle. And they're fine. But there's another group of the silver splitters that feel immeasurably lonely and lost. And that can really impact on their health. But generally speaking, I think women cope a lot better, whatever scenario, than men do. So from my experience, most men who go through divorce will try and immediately find a replacement so that they get someone to do their washing and cooking, etc. Men do not cope well on their own.
And do they indulge in risky behaviour more?
Yes. Yes, they do. For a while. Yeah. The older ones just want to find a replacement. The younger ones can go off the rail. We do have a lot of cases where cocaine has been very prevalent. And also, may I say, some of them go off the rails and start seeing prostitutes and things like that. And that comes up in quite a few cases where you've got a younger man that's gone off the rails. And it can really be quite a dangerous scenario because the wives will say, you can't see the children. And more people are having to be tested with hair strand testing to see if they're capable of looking after the children or whether they've got multitudes of coke and stuff in their system.
How important is the initiator of the divorce to the consequences?
It's completely irrelevant these days. The law has changed dramatically and did about 2-3 years ago when we introduced no-fault divorce. It doesn't matter if your husband or wife have committed adultery. Of course, it does to you. And the only significance if they start spending fortunes on their girlfriends, right, while you're going through the divorce. But what has led up to it is irrelevant now. You just have to say the marriage is irretrievably broken down. That has saved a lot of stress in some cases, but in others, particularly women are saying, I've never had the chance of the court knowing how many times he had an affair, how he behaved towards me, because it's virtually irrelevant in the finances. So there are a group that feel incredibly frustrated that the way they feel or have been made to feel is completely ignored by the courts. And they're the ones that can get very ill physically.
Do you think it should be relevant, the fault or the blame?
No, regrettably, I don't. Because at the end of the day, when judges are looking at it, they're looking at it very much, what's in the pot? How will we divide it? So who's done what to whom really doesn't come into it.
And it's difficult to prove, presumably, anyway.
Well, even if you can prove it, there's been a new case only a few weeks ago where a judge said, unless it's such heinous behaviour that the court simply cannot possibly ignore it, we are going to ignore behaviour and conduct. Quite often you get inexperienced solicitors shoving in conduct into the financial statements. It's a complete waste of time. Court will now just ignore it.
Yep. So moving on to the other parts of the family that are impinged by, impacted by divorce, the children and the grandparents.
Yes.
You know, I know that you're particularly passionate about making sure that grandparents have access, as they should, to children. The children need them as well, but it is a problem, isn't it?
Well, there's a huge problem with the grandparent scenario. I led a very big campaign with Esther Ranson and others about 2-3 years ago. I'm still campaigning for the rights of grandparents, but we realised that for a strange reason, the media don't care about grandparents. They see them as a bunch of old people that have probably upset someone along the way. They're not interested. What I'm now doing with a whole group of people, we've shifted it round. We want the rights of every single grandchild to see their grandparent, because we know from all the research that we've done and are continuing to do that grandchildren who have had a very close relationship with their grandparents, and for any spurious reason, the daughter-in-law or partners or the husband, whatever, has cut off the grandparents, that those children are suffering immeasurably. And if the parents are going through a divorce, they haven't got the comfort of someone looking after them that they can talk to, and it is horrendous for them. And they are the ones that are suffering, are now getting ADHD, are having stresses. The children are being referred to psychiatrists and therapists. If we could only scream to the world, for God's sake, look at these grandchildren suffering, and put it into English law that it's an absolute right of a grandchild to see their grandparents. And by that, we can then change attitudes. In days gone by, the grandparents would always be around. They'd be an extension of the family. But we've now sort of severed them off in a way that is so ridiculous. With all the people queuing up, not enough psychiatrists or therapists to see children, and with all the problems they're having, hey, who's the greatest resource available? Financially, emotionally, grandparents.
Yes, they've got the time, so that they are a fantastic resource.
They're an amazing resource, if only
beneficial.
that could be recognised. I mean, I've got 6 grandchildren, and I know how important it is to them that they have a relationship, you know, that I'm fun. I can sometimes be naughty, Nana, but anyway. But it's important. They've got that extended person that if they're worried about something, they can talk to you knowing it's in confidence, knowing that there's some emotional support available. And when perhaps they've lost a parent and then the grandparents are cut off, how cruel is that to the child?
And so they're potentially a fantastic part of their welfare. Children maybe who haven't got parents or access to them, do you become involved in having to care for them sometimes, giving advice about are the children all right through divorce?
Yes, totally. I mean, we are allowed to act on behalf of children themselves from about the age of 14. We've done a few. I don't particularly like them, but we have done it, and we will call in guardians for their interests, etc., so that they can look at what is missing, what they're not being given, and why they are like they are. We do an enormous amount of disputes about children. But the one thing that I cannot emphasize more for people's general health is children don't go deaf just because you're getting a divorce. Hearing you denigrate their father or their mother that they can hear that's part of them deeply disturbs them. And so often, women in particular, I have to say, chat away on the phone to their friends, telling them everything, with the kids in the room listening to every word. And where, they're talking on the phone to their mate and say, oh, well, I hope that we're not going to be turfed out of the house. What do you think that will do to your child's psyche and well-being?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. What would you say is the most rewarding aspect of family law with regard to divorce? What can you do best?
I can do best in taking a very distressed client and turning it all around so that we sort everything out and they walk out of my office with a smile on their face. That is the biggest reward of all.
Well, relationships are peculiar. As a GP, he used to do house calls. There was one couple I remember, and again, they won't remember themselves. I don't think they're still alive now. But they were always at loggerheads, always screaming abuse at each other. But that went on for years. And when one of them finally succumbed and died, the other one was bereft, had no one to shout at.
Yeah.
That was their life.
Yeah, it was.
So you're quite right.
And just because people shout at each other doesn't actually mean that they've got a bad relationship. They've still got a connection. The ones to worry about is where they don't speak, they don't communicate, they don't do anything together. Those are the ones to worry about.
And presumably there are relationships where, one partner might still be in love with the other, and other relationships where they really don't care about each other, and that must be easy to deal with.
Well, it's easier to deal with where people have a disconnect, but where one still carries a torch for the other and will not let go, that's when it's problematic, because sometimes they want to try and punish that person, and then we get into that syndrome where we can't settle the case because they want to push it right to the end. You think you're going to be rid of me? This is what I'm going to do to you. It's such a waste of money. It is such a waste of your own energy. It's just awful.
Right, we've been talking about how divorce can detrimentally affect one's health. Let's talk about the to-do list of staying well through divorce. We've mentioned some things already. You've talked about the importance of having realistic expectations, but presumably exercise and diet and adequate sleep and a support group.
Sleep is the number one.
Is it?
It really is, because if people don't sleep, they honestly can't think straight and won't take in half of what you're saying. So sleep's number one, food number two, trying to keep calm, okay? Going to the gym. If you hate gyms, walk.
Yep.
Try and walk with your friends. And when you're walking with your friends, don't talk about your divorce for the entire walk, because what you're doing is making yourself even more stressed by the time you come back. Try to limit talking in derogatory terms about the other person. You go round and round and round, and it doesn't move you forward. It's so important. So exercise, food, and sleep. If you are with a lawyer that is just firing off and not doing what you are asking them to do, change lawyers, right? People so often come to our firm having had the most terrible experience and the frustration that the lawyer is not listening to them or understanding. There's a vast difference between being realistic with a client and just not listening, or talking in section numbers, under this act and that act, which most people don't want to hear, they don't understand. You have to deal with it in simplistic language. So if you're stuck with a solicitor and you're feeling frustrated that they're not actually helping you, that can make you really ill.
And presumably it's not reaching for the bottle. It's not having another cigarette. It's saying, well, they're there if I absolutely need them in a crisis, but try to limit that because it doesn't help, gets in the way.
No. Because remember, if you start drinking to excess, particularly women, as you know from your experience as a doctor, then there is a risk they could lose the children. And we have dealt with so many cases where there's been hidden bottles all over the house and the children can see it as well. It is really risky strategy. Might make you feel temporarily great. The next day it doesn't. And we've had cases where the mums have been so inebriated that they don't take the kids to school. You're affecting your children. Don't do that. So I know it's understandable in some cases, but you have to then rein it in. When we get cases where we see that there's a major drinking problem, we get them help. We send them for people to then try and dry them out and stop them doing that.
Well, we've talked about all sorts of scenarios that you've come across in your amazing career. We talk about burnout in doctors. Presumably, sometimes you must feel very stressed. You've got court appearances. You've got people coming in tears.
You have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. I'm very fortunate because I've got a very close family, amazing friends and things, and I can pop to America when I feel stressed. Having a place over there with all the insanity that's going on over there, it countermands any stress that I feel. And you have to look after yourself as a lawyer as well, because you are taking on the world's stress. The interesting thing is therapists have therapy. Lawyers don't. So where does all that stress go? There are some data out there that show that barristers and solicitors have very high levels of drinking problems and mental health problems because of the stress they're under.
I think that's why you get on so well with doctors, Vanessa. We've got that in common. That's been so insightful, and you've given us some really positive tips for anybody undergoing the stress of divorce to say, look after yourself, stay well, realistic expectations, find a good lawyer that looks after your emotions as well as the legal part. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, and it's lovely to see you again.
And you, Vanessa. Well, my thanks to Vanessa, of course. Don't forget you can watch all my interviews on the Dr. Hilary Show YouTube page, including my recent conversation with Adele Roberts.
So I had the surgery, and when I woke up, I realised I had a stoma. So when they put me under, they said, you might wake up with a stoma. We're not quite sure how big the tumour is, where it is, you might need one.
And you have to sign the consent form.
Yeah, that's
for
right.
Such. Yes. So you woke up with the bag.
Yes. So I woke up, remembered I might have one, pulled back the covers, and I was like, oh, I've got one. And it was in a little see-through bag, but my tummy was so sore that I couldn't really sit up and see it properly. It wasn't until the next couple of days that I was able to go to the toilet and actually look in a mirror for the first time and see my body.
Did you feel a bit torn between, right, they've probably saved my life, but then I've got to live with this thing that I don't really know much about at this stage?
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming to me. So I was a bit like, I don't know how to work this. It was like having a naughty baby trapped to my front and sort of like with it, I had to change its nappy. That's what it felt like. Because stomas, people don't realise wriggle about, so they don't even sit still. But I also, strangely, because I've always had a bit of a bad relationship with my body, I think it was the first time I actually appreciated my body. And the first time that I saw my stoma, it felt like, I don't know, for some strange reason, I felt complete. I felt like I was me for the first time. I felt like I could actually appreciate this amazing machine that kept me alive. And in a way, the gratitude, having cancer, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but for me, I feel like it's helped me get my life back and really appreciate life.
Once again, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Do it right now. Make sure you watch the next episode and let's talk about what really matters to you and your health. And for more information and show notes on all our programs, go to drhilaryjones.com.